Can't compete with that cuteness. We got blue eyes. Just a little more hair than I do. So just quick show of hands. Who's been really following along with SIM's T.A.X.I initiative? All right, it's pretty good. Looks like about 2/3. And how many of you are familiar with the results of our most recent pilot tests? Okay, a little less. And how many of you are ready tomorrow to start telling your companies to adopt T.A.X.I? Okay, so here's what we're going to do. Today is going to be about making sure that 100% of the hands in this room go up when we ask the question, do you know about T.A.X.I? And I hope that we can get near 100% of hands to go up at the end to say, I get it, and I'm going to go back home, and I'm going to tell my boss, it's time, guys. Let's get on the T.A.X.I. Let's get in the T.A.X.I. I wanted to try to have that. Let's take the T.A.X.I. So what we're going to do is, I don't have quite the fast-paced video, but I do have a video. I want to throw a video up while I ask our panelists to come up. Let you watch for a couple of minutes just to get everyone's head around this, and then we're going to have about a half-an-hour panel to talk about why it's time to get on board, why it's time to get on T.A.X.I. So let's roll the video, guys, and panelists, come on up. If you think about content in the last 5 to 10 years, there's been a veritable explosion. We used to have just a dozen or two cable channels, and now we have thousands. You have thousands of digital media outlets. And so not only is there just more content being produced, but you have this multiplier effect as content traverses different distribution channels.
The impression that most people have is that if anybody puts out a data stream, that we can simply collect that data stream and put it together with any other data stream floating around and have quite a river of information flowing easily into our systems, and it doesn't work that way.
We're unable to measure and account for a lot of the touch points where we're actually making contact with these consumers.
We came up with the moniker T.A.X.I, which stands for Trackable Asset Cross-Platform Identification. And essentially it refers to an advocacy platform to encourage the industry to adopt both IDR, the Entertainment ID Registry, and AdID.
AdID is the industry standard for the registration of advertising assets across all media platforms.
The benefit of IDR is having a standard reference to identify each individual asset.
When you think of the benefits of what UPC codes have done for the industry, the inventory industry here and around the world, AdID does the same thing for advertising assets. It provides the opportunity to develop common codes for all advertising assets.
Implementing open technical standards for content and advertising identification will bring new levels of reliable measurement to all the participants in the television ecosystem.
What attracted LEGO to T.A.X.I was the idea of having visibility into how our content is being consumed across platforms.
The real benefit of something like T.A.X.I is to really improve efficiency within our own internal organizations, but also efficiency across the industry.
It means that program producers and advertisers can mark the content in a way that will be readable by many different devices in an open way, and that marking can be done at different post houses and using different kinds of equipment that are broadly available from competing manufacturers.
We and a lot of media companies are using similar technologies, but in 2, 3, 4, 5 cases the same exact infrastructure replicated to serve different parties, when a lot of these output from the infrastructure is actually the same.
Having a standardized approach to measuring and tracking those audiences across platforms would allow for significantly improved effectiveness and efficiency of our marketing plans, as well as better valuation of our media content ROI.
All of these benefits from T.A.X.I will enable advertisers, ad agencies, media companies to understand how consumers are consuming their content more rapidly, and will enable advanced analytics, and enhanced understanding, which will lead to more ability to innovate and to build new products on top of that.
Across the media industry, the challenges for implementing something like T.A.X.I, I think, are that the industry's relatively been slow to any type of operational change.
The work that SIM has done with the T.A.X.I proofs of concept have shown the benefits far outweigh the cost. And the sooner we prioritize those integrations, the faster we see the desired outcomes.
We just finished 2.5 years of studies and pilot tests. And when we finished the tests, the participants told us they felt there's about $2.5 billion of opportunity that T.A.X.I enables.
This is so important to anything that's creative. Creative not only in the sense of the creative commercial, but in creative thinking. We just can't execute it unless we have the infrastructure to support it.
The T.A.X.I project embodies the word progress to me.
It's the concept of attempting to bring workflow simplification, digital asset management, the ability to streamline the entire ecosystem.
If we get universal adoption of T.A.X.I, it will greatly simplify our ability to buy and sell in this industry, particularly as our industry becomes much more complex, much more multi-platform. There's a need for this. It's not easy. T.A.X.I can simplify the process.
Let's give it to our movie stars in the room. And on our panel, we'll be outside signing autographs at the end of the session today. So let's just cover a couple of things, and then I'm going to get right into introducing our panel and into our discussion today. We said it in the video, T.A.X.I stands for Trackable Asset Cross-Platform Identification. It's about identifying advertising and entertainment assets and setting up standards for tracking those assets across platforms. And we've used the term T.A.X.I, but think of it like a UPC. It's like putting a UPC on every piece of professional video content and advertising so that you can keep track of it as it goes all over the ecosystem. So we got here today by engaging with 28 media and entertainment companies in the supply chain to do a series of pilot tests and proof of concepts. And in those POCs, we demonstrated what it might be like if we actually had this capability for content and advertising. And the members of this panel were part of that POC, and the members of the video were part of that POC. I said it in the video. What happened when we got through this thing is that the folks who participated said there's about $2.5 billion of benefit that T.A.X.I enables. Some of that is because we have a better advertising marketplace, and that creates opportunities for brands to more safely and comfortably spend money in advertising and understand their returns. And it creates a tremendous value in workflow automation. So today, to dive into that much further, I have 4 illustrious members of our industry: Harold Geller from AdID. I've got Mike Overly from Lego, and that was a great video, by the way. Chuck, good job. Brad Epperson, NBC, and Janice Finkel-Greene from Magna, and I'm David Kohl. And let's get started. So I said $2.5 billion. That's a big number. And we said that part of that is going to come from spending in the industry. So why don't we start, Mike, with Lego. You're an advertiser.
Sure.
Tell us a little bit about that, breaking down that $2 billion.
Yeah, of course. So Chuck mentioned we first found out about SIM at the same conference last year. I was one of the people that was in attendance, and we I also saw David present on T.A.X.I. If I think back to what initially intrigued us about the concept of T.A.X.I, it's the idea of having visibility into how our content is being consumed across platform. And having that visibility is obviously going to make us more efficient marketers. I don't think that's shocking news to anyone that's investing in both linear and digital platforms. And if you think back to John Wanamaker's old adage that 50% of the money I spend in advertising is waste, we just don't know which 50% it is. By having a standardized approach to measuring these audiences across platforms, we're able to start to answer that question. And I think it's important to note that it doesn't mean that we just take money out of one medium and put it into a more effective medium. There's presumably a willingness to spend more. Oh, thanks, Jane. And I think the reason there's a willingness to spend more is that as we're able to better quantify and better justify our media content ROI, there comes a layer of confidence that just doesn't exist in today's inefficient advertising marketplace. And I think as we're able to more confidently invest in mediums that we know will generate positive ROIs, and as we're able to more confidently invest in mediums that we know will reach the audiences that we intend to reach, we'll have that willingness to spend more. And so I think for us as a brand/advertiser, our contribution to that $2.5 billion comes primarily in the form of improved effectiveness and improved efficiency.
So there's an upside, and I just want to hear what you said. You said that it's in addition. It's not a shifting.
Exactly.
It's a willingness to spend a little more because you feel this marketplace is a better place for you to spend your money.
Exactly.
So Janice, you're in the agency space. You represent, well, maybe not Lego, but companies like Lego. What's in it for the agencies?
I think that people don't, unless they actually have to do it themselves, realize how much work goes in to bringing data together, to collecting data just to do a viable analysis in the first place. Without any kind of standard identification, we get all kinds of diverse spellings and names, and I off the top of my head, I always like to mention that I found 5 different spellings for ESPN. I've tracked the Olympics. I've looked for CSI Mamie. And recently, I had the airport network and the airport channel on a buy. And I didn't know if that was the same vendor, if it was Fox and CNN, or maybe some canny buyer had bought the odd and even gates. It was impossible to figure out exactly how to put these pieces together. And now, in retrospect, it's a great punchline on a panel. But the nights that we spent trying to put these different vendors together and make sense out of it, just to do the analysis in the first place, was a lot of time and a lot of energy, and not just in the time that we spent doing it, but in the amount of work, really productive work, we could have been doing instead of doing that.
So, look, we all sit in this room, and we know that the pressures that are increasing in agencies to bring more efficiency and greater value for every dollar an advertiser spends. So I brought up our little equation here. On the operational cost savings, a lot of that takes out costs from the agency, but it also takes out costs from the client because it's faster. So there's value on both sides on the upside, if I'm hearing you, and there's also value on that savings side, not only to the agency but to the clients like Lego. Absolutely. So we've gone from advertiser, we've got the agency. Brad, you represent the media networks in the room. What's your sort of takeaway on this?
So from our part of the T.A.X.I initiative, as a media company and on an operational basis, I manage a group that provides services for 28 broadcast and cable properties within NBC Universal. We do 2.5 million commercials on those properties every year, and through that, there's a great amount of lack of standardization within the industry. So with that, something like T.A.X.I helps to drive that standardization. There's benefits to the measurement, there's benefits to the ROI, there's tremendous benefits to us from an operational capacity to have greater standardization on our inputs. So with those 2.5 million commercials a year, through that standardization, we get our copy instructions sent to our company. Through those copy instructions, we have over 500 different ways our advertisers send those to us, and that's an actual number. We've started to track them. Through things like T.A.X.I, it leads to standardization. It creates a better opportunity for that standardization, and I think standardization leads to even more standardization because you get that streamline. we're a service company. We want to provide a service to our ad agencies and our advertisers who buy on our networks and want to get a benefit for their product. It's more difficult for me to provide that service back to that client with a lack of standardization. So current workflow today, we can get an ISKI, not an ad ID, but an ISKI for a piece of commercial content to air on broadcast or cable. That same advertiser will buy on video on demand, and that same advertiser will buy on our digital platforms. And they'll provide us 3 different sets of commercials, 3 different naming conventions. So the ISKI for the broadcasting cable, for our VOD, or for our digital, it'll be a homegrown naming convention with a .mov file, and then our VOD could be just a QuickTime file with no naming convention attached to it at all. If you look at all 3 pieces of content, it's the exact same commercial, and it took us, 3 times, not even 3 times the fold to do it. We've got a very elegant business process on our broadcast to be able to take a .mov file, figure out the naming convention, how do we want to put it on a digital property. All of that is really difficult for us to provide a very good service back to our customers. And so, ad ID, standardization, T.A.X.I through that helps drive, our service level back.
So there's a cost savings to your company, there's a service level increase, there's an ability for you to use the data to monetize your assets and to provide a better product.
Correct.
I don't want to spend too much time because we're here in a measurement summit, but you guys are also pretty far ahead on ITER, which is the identifier that you're using to keep track of all your own content, your
Correct.
own assets.
Right.
And that, I've talked with many folks from NBC, that provides a huge workflow automation capability because you know what the content is, what the episode is, as it flows through all your platforms. So another large cost savings.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, look, this is all great stuff, but the reality is it's going to take some horsepower to implement. This isn't going to be free. We're not going to turn on a switch tomorrow and suddenly this entire room is going to be T.A.X.I compliant. Brad, I want to just ask you one more question, and then I'd like to get Harold involved here, but what are some of the top couple of things that you view as big cost drivers of implementing T.A.X.I in the big media network?
So we have to make sure that our wing-to-wing partners are right. So there's whatever that business case is for T.A.X.I, how it ends up being defined. We know the benefits, we know the idea of it, what is the true rubber to the road. Then from there we can reassess, do we have the right tags for our measurement partners? Do we have the right pass-through for our digital channel chains through our MUXes so that all the measurement data that you get from that taggable asset gets back to our company so you get your ROI faster and we can provide a better, faster turnaround in service. If you want to change your ad ID content, if you want to change your strategy, we will be able to provide that in a better manner.
I'll illuminate a couple of things that we found during the pilot test. On the cost side, the broadcast networks and cable networks will probably make some of the largest investments, and that's because they have the legacy broadcast infrastructure. And to be fair, that infrastructure is going to take some of the most horsepower to make changes to. Good news is on the digital side, we already have an infrastructure in place to shuttle assets and files with IDs and metadata through the ecosystem. Harold, let's talk about how this actually is going to work. What's the steps here? I threw up on the board kind of the 3 things that we're recommending for T.A.X.I. You're the first part of that because you're with Ad ID. Talk to us. Tell us a little bit about what happens in that registration. How does that work?
And keep in mind that the same process, it's the same process whether you're talking about an ad asset or an entertainment asset. So registration is the first step. And I want to start by, just with the same way that David did. I want to get a show of hands. How many people here are from agencies? Keep your hands up. How many people here are from creative agencies? There is a problem. From an ad standpoint, and this is the message, if you come away from this panel with nothing else but get back to creative agencies to register assets. Literally, from an ad standpoint and probably from an episodic content standpoint, it's less than 10 pieces of information. Inputting 10 pieces of information into a web-based system that is all information that we share today. We're just sharing them manually, whether it's through an email,
a fax, maybe on the back of a napkin, maybe carrier pigeon, I don't know. But the point is, to Brad's point, there are so many different ways of identifying, and all we really need to do is coalesce around the registration. Literally going to a website and inputting 10 fields of information about each asset. That's the starting point.
Harold, just, not to interrupt you, but a lot of folks in this room are saying, well, hold on a second, I can't scale if I've got to go to a website and I'm producing, how many programs and episodes you guys have, how many ads you pushing through? Tell us a little bit about not only the steps, but also the automation that you're building in.
So from the standpoint of an ad, most of our agencies actually say it's not a huge task to go in and register an ad. Now, there are technologies, there are some advertisers that have other systems that actually register ads. We interact with, we're using application program interfaces, APIs. We actually connect with other systems. So there's no need to actually go to the Ad ID website. You can actually go in through your own systems, and IDER does the same thing. You can do various ways of uploading spreadsheets and that kind of thing. So it's simple. And so that's the whole point. It's simple. It's all information that's contained inside of systems that we have today.
Okay.
It's standardizing those.
So how does the registry actually work? So everyone's in this room saying, well, what do I have to actually do? So you could go to a website and register. Yeah. If you're going to do this on a high volume basis, you can build in the APIs. Mm-hmm. And by the way, for those of you who are on the content side of the business, that same method of API-based registration works with the IDER database for your content assets. How is it structured? What's it look like? What kind of stuff can you track in the Ad ID database?
Very important. So it's the important stuff. Again, I'm going to sort of do a play on something that Colleen said earlier. If you can't identify it, you can't operationalize it. If you can't operationalize it, you can't measure it, and if you can't measure it, you can't monetize it. Okay, so it's the information you need for those elements. Very simple information: the name of the advertiser, the name of the product, the name of the brand, the length of the commercial. They're not things that you have to go looking too far for. We've got this thing in the industry called a commercial slate. It's all the information that's on that commercial slate that actually today is rekeyed somewhere around 30 times. So, but it's very basic information.
And Janice, in the agency world, you're thinking about that information. Is that, if you had that in the registry, and every buy order had that ID on it, and you can go find those basic pieces of information, is that what you need?
We need that, and we need that expanded to the common systems that we use. For instance, when buyers are selecting programs, can we encode in our systems the hierarchy from T.A.X.I in order to identify those pieces later? What happens in buying in real life is there is no program when we first go into the upfront. First we're talking about packages, and the packages have programs. And then it becomes a buy, and by the time it's finally made an order and it's out there, we don't actually have the means to bring it all together in any cohesive fashion. So we're running on NBC and we're running on NBC.com. And all of a sudden the buy is called something on NBC with a package name and something else on NBC.com with a different program name. And by the time all of the information comes back, the pieces don't match anymore. What we need is a cohesive and intelligent, organized way to tag the pieces when they go out so that when they come back, they all fit together and sort of mesh and match the way they were intended to, so we can make some sense out of all of this wonderful, rich data that's out there for us to use.
And important to something that both Janice said and something that Brad said, standardization happens in layers, especially in our industry. The bottom layer is the identification of the pieces. You identify an ad, you identify a station, you identify a program. Those become the foundation. Then when you talk about things like what Brad was talking about, commercial instructions, agency says to NBC, I'm going to run these 3 commercials in this rotation. Well, that's a commercial instruction. If you don't identify the commercial, if you haven't done that first layer, then that commercial instruction has no value. Same thing, when you're doing analytics, if you're taking things in cross sections, what is the cross section of the program in which I'm running, the ads that I'm running inside of that program? If I don't identify that bottom layer, the next layers don't work. The next layers become that much more complex.
Harold, a lot of companies in this room, and I'll do the show of hands thing again, are probably using ISKI today. So quick, if you're using ISKI, let me see who's using ISKI in their ad buys. And who's using, we had the ad ID show of hands. Who's using both ISKI and ad ID, and it just kind of depends on what the advertiser asks for? Nobody?
Let me ask a different question. How many people know whether they're using ISKI or ad ID?
That's a great question.
And that's the key. It's certainly, you're not asking the question. Are you going to a creative agency and saying, are you using ad ID for everything that you do? And this is some really important learning coming out of the T.A.X.I initiative. We all assume in the media and measurement world that we're all using unique identification. And the reality is we're the beneficiaries. As the media people, we're the beneficiaries. The creative agencies, who are the ones building the creative, are really the ones responsible for the registration. So It's really a communications effort. Bob said in the video, it's a supply chain issue. It's understanding everybody's role in that supply chain.
So Harold, I'm going to ask the hard question because everybody's asking us. ISKI's been around forever, and the agency has been controlling it. It is an identifier. It's an identifier. It's got its faults. Why now? Why is there a change suddenly for an uptake in companies that are starting to use ad ID as the authoritative source for advertising assets?
I'm going to use Brad's example. We have cross-platform complexity. I've seen situations, and Brad showed an example of 3 possible platforms. So he had his linear media, his on-demand, and his digital. I've seen situations where you have 5 different platforms. Throw over the top, throw mobile. All of these cross-platform media buys have created complexity and confusion. We're now getting to the point where you wonder, did that ad work better on television than it did on mobile? Did it work better online? We don't know because we're not identifying it. We don't have that common currency. ISKI, I will actually take issue with, is not an identifier. And for it to be an identifier, it should be unique. ISKI didn't have a registry. ISKI was never validated. We don't know, people in the online world don't recognize an ISKI code. The people in the mobile world certainly don't understand an ISKI code. So the compelling case now is cross-platform complexity, the long tail. And we've also, this panel could not have happened 5 years ago. The reality is buyers and sellers could not have this kind of conversation. We're now starting to see the financial imperative everywhere. Everybody's feeling the pain of, I need to do more with less or the same. To do that, you've got to actually find the standardization. The innovation that will happen based on that is untold. But we look at other industries that have adopted standardization, and we've seen the kinds of innovation. Look at the automotive industry, just-in-time shipping. The automotive industry realized that they were not building cars. They were in the real estate business. They were in the storage business. They were storing materials, and that was costing them a lot more money than the actual manufacturing. We will realize what our core businesses are when we start to actually look at the atomic assets, the individual assets, and identify them.
Harold, it sounds great, but Mike, you're the advertiser in the room. You guys using this thing?
No.
Okay.
Well, let me just
go ahead. Help us out on that one.
So 12 months ago, we didn't know ad ID existed. No offense, Harold.
None taken.
But the so that was step 1, awareness. We became aware, and I think step 2 was desire.
Knowing you had a problem with step 2.
Yeah, exactly.
You went to the AA meeting.
No, but so then I think we wanted to see the results of this proof of concept and see if this was something that isn't going away, and I think that's clear. And so I think that we're starting to have the conversations with our creative agencies. Yeah. And last night we talked to our media agency, and they said the same thing that you told us, David. It all begins with us. We're the advertiser. Without us, it's not going to happen. And I've heard Jane say that we're all standing around the pool holding hands, and now we all just need to jump in. And I think Lego's there. We're just waiting for someone to push us in the right direction.
So you're becoming a believer, right?
Right.
I got it. Let's go to what we really want this room to do, and it starts really with that first step, Lego, that you guys are talking about. So there's three major things that we really want this industry to start doing to move us towards a world where we're actually talking taxi, where we call it taxi compliant. We're all embedding this into the way we do business. The first step is a 2013 step. And it's exactly what you guys are doing over at Lego right now. You just finished this proof of concept. You saw the economics around it, and you said, holy cow, we really need to be part of this. And to your point, it's a jump in the pool kind of thing. So if Lego does it and nobody else does it, if Lego does it and the agency doesn't and Brad doesn't, the media network, it's not going to matter. Everyone has to hold hands and do a 1, 2, 3, and even though the pool is really cold and you don't want to jump in, we got to jump in because you'll get used to it. At least that's what my dad used to say. That's 2013. And it's not just, and it's going beyond going to a website and registering the assets, because that doesn't scale. It's using the APIs that AdID has made available. It's working with your vendors like DG and Extreme Reach on the ad side and on the content side, on the transcoding and distribution vendors, to embed that technology platform between your media asset management and distribution so that the registration is automatic and it's part of your workflow. And so this year is agreeing to do it and figuring out how to operationalizing it. Next year, in 2014, we're going to do the heavy lifting. That's where we're asking companies to start working on operationalizing what we call the flow-through. The ability to move assets and IDs from post-production through distribution, through consumption, measurement, reporting, and all the subsequent actions that we'll be able to do faster, with more transparency and greater accountability. The other thing, so that's 2 and 3 together. Okay? Why do we push those out? Because it's heavy lifting. We recognize that companies are going to have to, inside, figure out what it's going to take. Put those business cases together. So, Janice, at the agency, what do you think might be involved? You were through one of these, actually you were through a couple of these POCs.
I did.
What do you think would be involved in that 1, 2, 3 step over the next 2 years?
The first is education. I think one of the biggest challenges we have is that there's a feeling out there that we already have this, that somehow we all have the ability already to pull together all of the information from all of the sources that come along, and all we need is a good analysis to uncover all of these insights that are just lurking there waiting to be discovered. The truth is, we have to show the people that we work with how difficult it is and how disconnected the different media types are. It's very nice for everybody to say we're buying cross-platform and we're not segregated by media type anymore, but our legacy systems and our legacy thinking keep us mired in a process that's outdated, that's holding us back. I guess it's one of those steps where we have to admit we have a problem first.
I like that. I think we're going to have a 12-step program, and we'll have evening meetings after work on this.
We got a problem.
Used to be a practitioner in our industry, you'd actually have to pass the 12-step process.
Yeah, exactly.
Certified.
So one step is recognizing that there's a problem here. There's other steps. For example, I'm going to throw them out. Tell me how these resonate. There's figuring out in the organization, where's that step in asset creation to distribution where we have to register? I don't know that we know that within the agencies holistically. Is that right?
There's not much thought given to it. I didn't know where we had ISKI and AdID until I had to do the test. And then Harold had to help me. I didn't know where to start. We started by calling the buyers. The buyers didn't know, they called the clients. We actually hadn't given it any thought at all. So the first would be to compile one of those master lists. Everything goes back to master data. So we talk about this a lot. We can't have massive data without master data. We need a way to bring it together, and we would have to, for a start, figure out who our clients are, what their commercials are, and how many are registered, how many are not, and then find the obstacles to registration, and one by one convince people that this is the future, this is the way forward. We can't do anything really smart if we don't do this first.
And make the investments in the organization to make that registration just part of the natural workflow. Harold, you're going to say something?
It actually, going back to something Janice said, because that hit me. You know, the first thing that Janice did when she said, I'm not sure where we register, they actually called AdID. Because we do know if an advertiser is or is not using us. And that might be the first step. Send an email to cs@ad-id.org and see if your advertiser is using AdID. I promise you'll get an answer back within a day.
Brad, you're on the media network side, and I said it earlier, and I do mean it. You guys probably have the biggest hurdles in your organization because of that legacy broadcast infrastructure.
Right.
How are you guys getting this started?
So we're already registering IDER. From an AdID perspective, I think it's upon us as a media company to evangelize it, to evangelize that standardization and say we recognize this is the choice for that standardization. You know, and then to move to the next step and to reference what Janice said was, we know we did the POC. We know how hard it was to do the POC. I mean, to get 2 weeks worth of testing done on the POC, it took 43 people, and I have nearly 800 emails in my T.A.X.I POC file to get to do the spot. But we did it. We got it done. So it was like the rocket that had the test monkey in it. You know, we've gotten that part done. Everybody knows now we can take the next step and go. So for us, it's showing that operationally we can pull it off. We know that we recognize the benefits. Now how do we, what's the business case to push it forward?
So for a big media company where the investments are going to be a little larger, it's taking stock on all the different departments from that post-production all the way through content distribution and on the ad side through probably sales and trafficking,
right,
through distribution and into measurement and research.
And with a good groundswell of clients that are behind it. You know, Janice and I spend a lot of time talking about how to better do business with one another, but if we're the only two doing it, then it's not an effective way for us to operate.
Got it. And Lego, I know you guys are, all right, I like AdID. What's the step? What's the tactical step that you guys are planning?
I mean, I think I said it before. We're there at the pool, waiting to jump in along with everyone else. I think that we're starting those conversations internally to talk about next steps.
Good. So I think that was my last slide. Yeah, it is. So we wanted to make sure we finished with time because this is a big topic. To allow you to ask questions, I think the messaging here is pretty clear. There's a pretty enormous business case, about a $2.5 billion benefit to this industry. $2 billion coming from increased spend, and about $500 million in savings on workflow and the lack of duplication and the ability to track things that are named the Olympics and the Olympics.
2.5 men.
And 2.5 men spelled, and I'm still trying to figure out how you spell ESPN 5 ways, but we'll do that offline. So there's a big business case, and there's a crawl, walk, run process that we're going after to get companies to adopt this. The crawl, commit to registering assets. It's really not hard. It doesn't cost a lot of money. In fact, the registration itself is nothing.
So from an AdID perspective, the most you're going to pay to register an AdID is $40, and that price goes down with volume. From an IDER perspective, it's an annual membership fee that goes from anywhere from $5,000 to $25,000, again, because of volume of registrations. These are not the significant costs. again, the majority of significant cost is on the media side. The
They're
minimal
also
cost.
big beneficiaries. So yes,
And
so,
we're the
so,
beneficiaries.
so the crawl is inexpensive and easy. I'll go back a slide if I can figure out how to do that. Yeah, inexpensive and easy. Figure out this year how to commit in your organization and how to operationalize that registration. The walk, that starts with next year. Start with the ID flow through, whether you're an advertiser who wants to see that flow through to reporting, whether you're an agency who has to take those ads and get them through the ecosystem and into your own analytics and metrics, whether you're a media network who has to get your content and ads through to distribution. The walk is figuring out how to do that and focusing in on the digital side, which is a little easier, which already has the ability to manage content and metadata together, and the harder part on broadcast, in which there's some technology involvement, and Sim continues to drive that forward through a working group. And then finally, to embed that into all your media measurement so we can finally see the benefits of greater speed, greater transparency, and a whole lot of accountability in this marketplace, which will really spark the $2 billion of upside spend that guys like you in the advertising world will put into it.
And David, keep in mind, for most people in this room, it's all about stage one.
That's true.
Ad ID and ITER and SIM have committed to champion stage 2 and 3. The measurement companies have said, if we start seeing unique identification in our processes, we will start to operationalize them. So it's really a one-step process for most people in this room. We'll do the rest. We'll do the heavy lifting.
Maybe. I'll give it to you that they've got to take the first step.
Yes.
And then we'll see how it goes.
Yes.
So I want to leave room for questions. This is a big topic. So first, just who feels, yeah, you got a question back there? Mike Donahue from 4As.
David, it's a great panel, and I would like Harold and Janice to address this question. Ad ID is the great way to basically have a common way of identifying an advertising asset. How would Janice and Harold solve the problem of finding a way that there isn't 5 different ways to spell ESPN and only have one way to identify any corporate asset, whether it's P&G, whether it's NBC? It'd be hard to find 5 ways to spell NBC, but I guess somebody could do it. How do you do that?
You put a space at the end. It's
Okay,
magic.
all right. Seriously, Janice, I mean that's a big issue, and how do you solve that? I think Janice and Harold might have an answer on that.
Go ahead, Janice.
The key is the code. The code is the identifier. It becomes a string that sits behind all of the names and all of the content. We can call it anything we want. We can put any free-form field, text field on it, and call it anything that's memorable. We can call it Harold. But if the right code is underneath, we can always pull it together no matter what anybody has managed to type in a frenzy trying to get buys on in the middle of the night. People make mistakes, and people have imaginations, and they spell things differently, and we shouldn't ever try to put a stop to that because it's futile. What we need is a firm, identifiable code that's built with a hierarchy so that we can start building it right from the beginning and add to it, add all of the metadata all along the stream until we have enough of a base underneath whatever kind of fluffy, fancy, identifiable, memorable names it sits on top of it, so that we can bring it together without agonizing over what somebody meant by some arcane spelling.
So, Mike, to just continue on what Janice said, behind each of Ad ID and ITER's databases are what are called standardized hierarchies. And there are standardized hierarchies in Ad ID for a parent company of an advertiser. So it might be Procter & Gamble. Under Procter & Gamble are all of the divisions, so that might be advertisers and products and brands. Those standardized hierarchies become the center of the description of those ads. And again, those are built into Ad ID and also built into ITER, where you've got things that are called controlled vocabularies. And yes, we're still going to have the free-form capabilities. A title of an ad is going to be the title of an ad. But the idea is that you have to start with, again, back to the layers. You've got certain elements which can be and should be standardized and enforced.
Okay. Jane Clark.
Just to introduce Kip Welch, who's here from ITER, in case people during the break would like to ask questions. And we weren't able to get him on the panel because we just had too many people, but we do have ITER in the house, as we say. And so,
in the house.
I don't know, do you want to say anything that you've been...
No, I just think this is great. Glad to be here. Hope that ITER can actually be operationalized in a way that makes all of your lives easier. That's why we created it.
And again, one of the key point elements of TAXI is we're at the advocacy for domain-specific registration of assets. And domain-specific being you've got entertainment content and you've got ad content. And we work, AdID and ITER work very closely together on a lot of work.
Good. There was a question in the back over here.
Colleen Milway. My question is regarding the current advertisers that are using AdID, Harold. And I don't know what % are currently using it, but is it the exact same coding process that's currently in place that you're talking about being TAXI, or is it a different coding process?
So 50% of television ads are actually coded with AdID already. And anyone who's already using AdID is already step 1 TAXI compliant. Same thing with ITER. 50% of episodic content is already registered with ITER. They're already compliant, stage 1 of TAXI.
And the second part of your question, TAXI is the advocacy platform to accelerate the industry's adoption of AdID and ITER. So TAXI is AdID and ITER. Okay. Other questions? Going once? Twice? All right, sold. So guys, just as a quick wrap up, the last minute. All right, I decided to ask.
I think this is for you, David, but maybe Harold and others would want to chime in. My question, I was struck when you used the parallel of the UPC. My question is, what was learned, because that certainly affected our industry. What was learned, what could be learned, what should be learned from that experience that might have application to this?
Great question. Fantastic question. There are two things that we looked at in the UPC case and rollout that we hope we are emulating here. The first is that they too took a crawl, walk, run approach to getting UPC to work. It was a proof of concept. They had a very narrow scope that they were trying to demonstrate, and they were able to come up with a sort of equally precise, and in that case I mean sort of imprecise, but order of magnitude benefit case. And it was enough for the industry to say, this is worth trying. And so back in, I think it was late 60s, I have the dates, but I can't remember them, late 60s when Kroger Supermarket was the first supermarket to say we're going to adopt this on our products. And they just showed how one use case, which in that case was inventory management, made sense. So they crawled, and then as a result of that crawl, the industry all of a sudden started seeing other benefits that weren't directly associated with that initial use case. And those other benefits is what created the explosion of adoption of UPC for the entire supply chain. We hope that will happen here in TAXI as well. So that's number two. We're focusing on the measurement use case in these TAXI pilots, but we believe that there are operational and performance benefits in all other areas of content and advertising distribution, and perhaps one day things like anti-piracy. I mean, you name the application, there are ways in which this foundational element can accelerate or make that easier to deploy, just like UPC was.
And the other learning from the UPC case history that I've studied quite a bit is universal adoption came when Walmart and Sears stood up and said, we require this. It really did come from that side. So that's the other piece.
Well, so where's Walmart and Sears?
Walmart and Sears both use AdID already.
All right.
So, now, but
we're there.
From a retail, so think about it from our industry standpoint, and not to put Brad on the spot here, but it really comes from the media saying, we're going to stop accepting whatever you give us, and we're going to only accept valid, unique identification.
Yeah, that's a difficult dance. You know, we like to get paid. Mike pays my paycheck, essentially, and you know, as a service company, we do all we can to do best by our clients. But what we do want to do is evangelize the fact that these more elegant workflows allow us to provide that service in a better method, and T.A.X.I's that.
I'm kind of on with Brad on this one. I think it starts with a bunch of us holding hands and getting in the pool, but there better be a lot of advertisers holding our hands.
Yeah. And water in the pool.
All right, with that, thanks very much. We appreciate your time today.
Thank you.